Joseph Abbeel's memoir offers a riveting glimpse into the life of a Flemish horseman conscripted into Napoleon's Grand Army. This is the 11th episode. We find Abbeel in the hands of some Cossacks. Let's begin. From there, they led me in a group of more than 1,000 prisoners to Elbing. After 2 or 3 hours of walking, the Cossacks let us take a brief break in a village. I knew the place very well, as I had been billeted there for 3 months a few years earlier. I dared to hide myself in a barn under the straw until the Cossacks left with the others. Once they were gone, I made my way along back roads to Stargard in Poland, where I arrived on January 18th after a journey full of setbacks and misery. Yes, I tell you again, it was miserable. The dysentery worsened by the day, and I grew increasingly exhausted. I could only eat when kind people gave me something, as I had no money to buy food. I was afraid of everyone, fearful of being captured again. I walked without shoes, just a few rags tied around my feet. I traveled through unknown forests, knee-deep in snow, with frozen feet, feverish, and with 5 open wounds, eaten up by fleas. Yes, would all this not truly be called misery? And when I arrived in Stargard, I was immediately caught and placed with a group of starving prisoners of war. The next day, we left under the escort of 10 very old Cossacks for Elbing. Once we were in the woods, I chose to make a run for it along with half of the group, thus escaping once again from the hands of the Cossacks. By evening, I reached a hunter's house in the middle of a forest. I entered and received what I needed, even a torn jacket and bread to continue my journey. The next morning, I set off for Konitz, but just as I was about to reach the city, I accidentally ran into a group of Kruiskens farmers and was captured for the 3rd time. One of them forced me to take off my trousers in the middle of the snow, woolen trousers with a warm lining that I had bought in Königsberg. The man put them on himself and gave me his poor linen trousers in exchange. Thus they made thousands of soldiers undress, often leaving them completely naked, and let them stand in the snow. They took me to their general in the city, who questioned me in French and German about many things. I responded and always maintained that I was Dutch, as I knew that the Russians had the most sympathy for the Dutch. Eventually he gestured to his wild men to take me away. After I had walked 20 or 30 steps, he called out to me, "Français, Français." I looked back, and then he said, "You are a French scoundrel, for otherwise, you would not have looked back. Therefore, tomorrow, along with the other scoundrels, you will get a bullet through the head." I tried to explain, but it was futile. The general ordered me to be taken to jail. They took me to a dilapidated house outside the city, locked the doors, and left without giving me any food or water. I lay down disheartened on the ground, but suddenly thought that maybe I could still escape. So I got up and examined my cell. I discovered that the shutters of the window were rotten and only nailed down with 3 or 4 nails. This gave me new courage. I lay down again, unable to sleep. Around midnight, I got up, kicked the window open with little effort, and fled into the woods. I ran through the underbrush until 4 in the afternoon, not knowing if there was an end to the forest, but then I felt so weak I could no longer move. I didn't know what to do and was too tired to live any longer. As it was exceptionally cold, I figured the best thing would be to let myself freeze to death under the oak tree where I was resting. So thought, so done. But after lying on the ground for half an hour, perhaps God thought I hadn't suffered enough misery to leave life just yet, I heard a dog barking. This made me think that there must be people nearby. I was nearly dead, but the dog's barking gave me new courage. I tried to stand and continue my way. By evening, I emerged from the forest. In the distance, I saw a light, which I walked toward. After a long walk, I arrived around 8 o'clock in the evening at a beautiful castle, where I met a woman and 2 men. Shivering, I asked them if I was far from a village and where the mayor lived. The woman immediately stepped back and pointed out his house to me. I went inside. The mayor, who was weaving, refused to give me a lodging ticket. He told me that the area was heavily quartered with Cossacks and that no one would want to take me in, as the French scoundrels had tormented the population too much. When I saw that all my smooth talk was of no help, I told the mayor that I could go no further and that I would stay right there. I sat on a bench and refused to leave. The mayor got up, fetched a handful of straw, placed it behind the stove, and told me to lie down on it. I had barely been in the house for 15 minutes when the stench, warmed by the heat, started to emerge again. The mayor's wife approached me and tried to force me to leave. The man said nothing, but his wife was furiously angry, grabbed me by the legs, and tried to drag me outside. Just then, as if sent by God, the woman I had asked for directions came into the house. She called the wife by her name and asked, "What are you doing? Leave that poor man alone." And immediately, they both carried me back to my straw. That lady then asked where I was from and what my homeland was. I answered that I was from Flanders and that I was returning from Moscow. I briefly explained to her my situation and that of many others. She began to cry and said, "My brother also marched there with the French and might well be in the same situation as you." She continued talking while crying. She left and forbade anyone to bother me. Half an hour later, she returned with good broth, half a chicken, and about 3 pounds of fine bread. She wanted me to eat, but I could not. Finally, she wished me good night tearfully. I didn't sleep all night, constantly wondering what would happen to me the next day. When morning came, I wanted to get up and leave, but I couldn't even lift my head, let alone my body. So I was forced to lie down and await my fate. By 9 o'clock, no one had spoken a word to me, good or bad, which surprised me greatly. But soon the lady came, asking about my health condition. I replied that I could no longer move and hoped I would soon be relieved of my suffering. She consoled me and said that I should stay until I was recovered. Yes, she said she would visit me daily and bring food. Indeed, she returned in the afternoon with the Baron's daughter, a girl of about 14 years, and they brought me a good portion of food. Baron von Skyton, that was his name, and the Baroness and the lady inquired about my health daily, as I later learned from the chambermaid. This chambermaid was also only 21 years old. After about 8 days, I felt no improvement. Therefore, I asked for a bottle of schnapps, which I drank in one gulp to try to die. After that, I drank more than half a bucket of cold water, which also wasn't conducive to my recovery, but it was all in vain. 2 or 3 days later, the Baroness sent someone to the town of Sklokow and had something bought at the pharmacist's for me to take. After 2 to 3 days, the diarrhea began to subside, and I improved day by day. When the Baroness, who, as I have mentioned, inquired daily about my health, learned this, she provided me with a clean shirt and paid more attention to my health condition. She also ordered the straw on which I lay to be refreshed. Using a dung fork, they dragged the dirty straw outside, just as one cleans out a cowshed, for I had defecated in it for 15 days. My other clothes were boiled to cleanse them of the fleas that had nearly devoured me and had always stayed with me in large numbers. Around February 20th, I heard that the King of Prussia had forbidden anyone to take in or keep anyone from the French army, risking a fine of 300 thalers and a long prison sentence. Since I was now able to travel and did not want my benefactor to get into trouble because of me, I immediately went to the castle to thank the Lord and ask his permission to leave. On the way to the castle, I met the Baron, whom I did not recognize. He asked me where I was going. I explained the reason for my visit. He said that I should go to the castle, but that the Baroness would not want me to leave because I was not yet fully recovered. When I arrived at the castle, the lady had already seen me coming through the window. She started crying and sent her daughter to ask why I had come. I told her about my intentions, but she told me to return to my lodgings, as her mother was not home. She also said they would let me know when I could leave. In the afternoon, a chambermaid brought my food and told me that the lady and her daughter had shed many more tears. She also said I should stay until she came to tell me. Because, she said, another sick Frenchman has arrived, and when he is cured, you will leave together. This French soldier had also arrived sick, but he was not as lucky as I was because he had to change lodgings every day. He also did not receive food from the Baron but was fed by the citizens on the Lord's orders, who often themselves had no bread for 14 days. The soldier was from Calabria and spoke no German. Yet, the villagers, by the end of our stay, went to great lengths to keep us out of the hands of the Cossacks. When the Cossacks conducted searches for food, which happened often, we were warned and hidden by everyone, young and old. On March 1st, we went together to the Baron to thank him. He gave us food and drink, 12 shillings for travel, and a route, after which we left with tears in our eyes. We took the road to Stargard in Prussia. An hour after leaving the Baron von Skyton's village, we were overtaken by farmers with 4 empty wagons. The farmers stopped and asked me where I was from and where I was going. After I told them I was German, they forced me to get on one of the wagons. I rode with them for 10 hours. They gave me food and drink, but they did not want to take my comrade. They even spat in his face while saying, "You are a real Frenchman and you will soon be captured." It pained me, but what could I say? Indeed, he was captured that same day and sent to Siberia. 2 years later, he arrived in Lille just like me, and there he told me everything, as will be explained later. After I left these farmers, I was forced to beg along the way and rely on the hospitality of my enemies. One day I received food, and another I did not. Eventually, I reached a village on the Oder, but since the bridge in Schwedt had burned down, I did not know how to get to the other side of the river. Therefore, I asked a farmer in the village if I could stay overnight, which he allowed. At the same time, a merchant with cockades arrived at the house, who told the farmer that no one could enter the city without such a cockade. It so happened that I had received 4 groschen that day in a castle, with which I bought a cockade. In the evening, the farmer brought a bundle of straw into the kitchen for me to lie on. While I lay there thinking about what to do next, a company of Prussian artillery arrived in the village to spend the night as well. The soldiers made their guardroom in the house where I was lying. I heard the guards talking about how they would transport their cannons across the water early in the morning. When the Prussians left in the morning, I got up, asked for some flour, sprinkled it on my hat, placed the cockade on it, and followed the soldiers in my white soldier's jacket, in which I resembled a miller, to where they were loading the cannons. I boldly walked among them to where they were loading the cannons. I stood next to a wheel to help load the cannon onto the ship. Once on the ship, I took a broom and swept the snow off the deck, as it was snowing. Everyone looked at me, but no one asked who I was. The sailors thought I was an officer's servant, and the soldiers thought I was a shipper, I suppose. When we reached the other side, I saw several Cossacks on shore. They had ridden there to see the cannons arrive. But I kept my cool and helped unload the cannons as soon as we landed. We placed them behind a barn. After that, I walked into the city, where I begged for 40 groschen and a lot of bread. Days later, I arrived in Stargard. Since begging had gone so well for me before, I made my rounds there too, even in houses where Prussian officers and generals were staying. After I had collected a lot of money, I walked satisfied into a tavern to have a sip of schnapps, but there I bumped into a sergeant from the city who asked for my pass. Since I did not have one, he took me to the city commander, whom I recognized because he had given me 4 groschen before. He asked me who I was, where I wanted to go, and why I was begging, although that was forbidden. I apologized for the latter and answered the other questions by saying I came from Moscow and was going to Holland. "You will never get there," he said. "You must enlist in the hussars with the Death's Heads." He said this to another person who came to get a pass as well. When I showed him my wounds and he saw that I was not fit for service, he had the sergeant lead me to the city gate. There, the sergeant's toes kissed my rear end. With a kick, he drove me away while saying, "Walk, French scoundrel." I walked that day to a village 3 hours from the city, where I was a guest at night with kind people. They told me that the day before, 2 French officers in their village had been chopped up into mincemeat by the Cossacks. From there, I traveled to Mecklenburg. At the border of this principality, I was fortunate to find a man who let me stay overnight in his house. In the evening, we chatted about various things, but mostly about the misfortunes of war heroes. "I have been a soldier for 30 years, he said, "and I know all too well that the essence of a soldier's life is not to complain. Tomorrow you will enter the territory of Mecklenburg, but you will certainly not get far before they ask for your pass, and you don't have one. But I know a good solution if you can write a bit of German. I have an old pass, signed by the commander of Neubrandenburg, which you could copy." I did so immediately. When I entered that country the next day, I was asked for my pass in every village. Each time, I showed the forged pass, which was barely glanced at. Thus, I traveled through the entire country without being captured. But one day, I was in a village tavern having a schnapps. While I was sitting there, 3 drunken Cossacks came in and asked for a bottle of vodka. One of them patted my shoulder and asked me who I was. I replied that I was Dutch. He grabbed me by the collar and shouted, "Dobre, Dobre, Hollander." They made me drink 2 glasses of schnapps, after which they rode away. I must say I preferred seeing their heels rather than their toes, for I feared I would end up like the 2 French officers I had mentioned earlier. I continued my journey until I finally reached Schwerin on a Sunday afternoon, the capital of Mecklenburg. I entered a house to ask for something to eat. A woman who was sweeping the floor asked me who I was. I replied, "A Dutchman." She took her broom and beat me out of the house, without giving me a chance to say anything. "The Dutch have ruined us," she said. Then I entered another house, where I passed myself off as a Swiss. "Those are good people," they said there, and I received a generous portion of food. Afterward, I continued to Rotzeburg. In the house where I went to stay overnight, I passed myself off as a Russian. Those people had never seen a Russian and out of fear gave me cooked meat, roast meat, beer and brandy. From there, I walked to Gatebusch and Malm, where I visited the grave of Till Eulenspiegel. Then I entered the Kingdom of Denmark and took the road to Hamburg. In the evening, I arrived in a suburb of Hamburg, where I stayed overnight, intending to join our army the next day. It was on the other side of the Elbe, and I was on this side. But the next day, I could not find any boat or bridge to get across, so I was forced to enter the city. I had planned to take a fishing boat at night to reach the other side. However, at the city gate, I was captured for the 4th time and taken prisoner by the Cossacks, those cursed and damned dogs. They handed me over to the civilian guard, who treated me very well, as it mainly consisted of high gentlemen of the city who had almost all served in the army themselves. But before I tell about the captivity, I want to let the reader know with a few words how unlucky I was. As a deserter, I had traveled more than 250 hours walk, 1,000 kilometers, without money, one day with food and another day without, often spending the night outdoors, walking 9 to 10 hours daily, almost eaten by lice, with 5 open wounds and frozen feet. After surviving many dangers and now finally being less than half an hour's walk from my friends and brothers in arms, I was captured and would be led as a prisoner to Russia. Yes, one would rather be shot through the head than endure such misfortunes. This concludes the 11th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of Abbeel's adventures? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.